how's it going? I've been thinking a lot lately about all the different types of gamers out there, and something I've come to realize a little more lately is how there's so many people who either can't afford a gaming desktop or simply don't have the space for one. I know that there are a ton of you out there who are in college and have your little laptop your parents bought you or that you bought to be light, portable, used for notes, writing papers for work, because I do the same. I have the DELL XPS 13 9370. This model that I've got here has the i7 8550U quad core with a turbo of 4 gigahertz, 8 gigabytes of LPDDR3 RAM, and the Intel UHD 620 integrated graphics. Not very powerful in the gaming world. It has no dedicated graphics card, just good old Intel UHD 620 integrated video. Now, the more I looked into exactly what I could do on it gaming wise, at first I was pretty bummed. I was trying games at 1080p and I was getting like 6 FPS, so I was bummed. I put it aside, I left it just for schoolwork, and I just did gaming on my desktop. That's fine. But not everyone can do that. I was used to 8700K, 5 gigahertz, a GTX 1080 in my desktop. So anyways, after some research and testing, I bring you the DELL XPS 13 gaming guide. Well, it's not so much a guide. It's more just some guidelines of which games you can expect to be able to run and what you can do to adjust the settings enough to get you in the game, in your dorm room, in your little apartment, on the couch. Alright, roll the clips. We're starting off with Northgard. It's an RTS game similar to Age of Empires with an evolving story, each chapter focusing on different gameplay mechanics. It was released in 2017 by Shiro Games. It's a very fun game with a great storyline where you play as the Vikings to conquer the land. The graphics have a bit of a cartoony look, and the XPS 13 manages to handle the game at 1080p at low settings with relative ease. Here, the game ran at an average of 45.9 frames per second with minimum drops of 34 frames per second and maximum highs of 58 frames per second. Very playable at those frames given the type of game. I want to note that the game performs much better when run in OpenGL, at least on the XPS 13. Next, we'll take a look at how the 13-inch Ultrabook does with the relatively old 2004 release Half-Life 2. We here managed to maintain an average of 89.5 frames per second at maximum settings in 1080p. Lows of 55 frames per second and a high of 129 frames per second left this game feeling very smooth and completely playable. It had a nice, smooth, responsive gaming experience despite being run on a laptop that weighs just 2.65 pounds or 1.2 kilograms. Looking at Portal 2, we find another decent gaming experience. Though this game is on the Portal 2 engine, released in 2011, which is a much newer engine than Half-Life 2, we're still able to achieve playable frame rates on the UHD 620 integrated graphics. Portal 2 runs at 1080p low with trilinear settings at an average of 84.5 frames per second, minimum of 59 frames per second, and a 111 frame per second high. Very playable, especially in a game that doesn't require ultra high frame rates to play due to it mainly being a puzzle game, but the minimum it reaches is about the refresh rate, so no issues there. Counter-Strike Global Offensive is a very popular game with a huge player base and a very active competitive player base too. The game is very accessible and most systems can run it to some degree. The XPS 13 is no exception. CSGO is totally playable on the XPS 13 at 1080p with 62.4 frames per second average, lows of 35 and highs of 72. You likely won't be winning the CSGO majors on this laptop, but you can at least get in game and click some heads. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is the massive open-world fantasy RPG game that took my senior year of high school by storm. Released in 2011 and re-released in 2016 as the Special Edition, the XPS 13 managed to spit out an average of 51 frames per second at 720p on low settings. There are stutters here and there that don't really impact the gameplay for me. With lows of 30 and highs of 60, the game is completely playable and a great gaming experience with hours and hours and hours of content on your ultra portable Ultrabook. Overwatch for me was an interesting one. The highly competitive MOBA style shooter released in 2016 by Blizzard Entertainment for me needs to feel responsive since it's such a fast-paced game. I was able to obtain slightly better graphics but lower frame rates that just weren't consistent enough. So I turned all the settings down to the absolute lowest. Once this was done, at 720p, 50% render scale, the game managed an average of 84.3 frames per second with lows of 46 and highs of 162. Once the settings were tweaked, we actually got a very playable, enjoyable experience. Once you get used to the blurriness of the characters, it feels and almost plays like it does on 240Hz and 300 FPS. Well, not really. I was pleasantly surprised by this game released in 2013. I expected a game that was considered to be very visually beautiful at the time to grind this little 13-inch to a halt. But rather, when we set it to 1600 by 900 resolution and low settings, we had a very playable and visually pleasing experience where we obtained 65.7 frames per second average, lows of 42, and highs of over 100 at 107 frames per second. The character models are quite pixelated if you look closely, but overall it was a totally playable and very enjoyable experience. Finally, we loaded up some GTA 5, a game that is known to be pretty rough even on some modern systems. I remember waiting in line at Best Buy to buy it for my PlayStation 3 back in 2013. Obviously, we dropped the settings and the resolution to 720p, so that did help with making the game more playable. Honestly, this game looks just about as good as it did on the PlayStation 3 on this little Dell. The game ran at an average of 43 frames per second, lows of 30, and highs of 60. It was totally playable and a surprisingly smooth experience, even in car chases. And when you had 5 stars with the police coming after you with the SWAT team. Okay, so we've seen 8 somewhat modern, popular games that can be played on the DELL XPS 13 Ultrabook. It's a really capable little machine if you're willing to sacrifice a little visual fidelity. On the road, in your dorm, your hotel room, having an ultra portable that can let you play competitive Overwatch and the latest Grand Theft Auto 5 is pretty incredible. Anyways, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think. If you liked the video, hit the thumbs up or the subscribe button or both, and I'll see you next time.